Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Muraski from De Pere PD in Wisconsin. He is a lifelong resident of the Green Bay, Wisconsin area, currently serves as Chief of Police in De Pere PD, Wisconsin, which is a community where he grew up, and he attended high school there as well, which is really cool. Graduated from University of Wisconsin-Madison, served 21 years with the Green Bay PD, joined De Pere PD in 2019. He's a graduate of the FBI National Academy, completed the Yellow Brick Run, and is really proud to serve in the community close to home and values hard work and pushing beyond personal limits. Welcome to the show, Chief Muraski. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, I've been actually really looking forward to this conversation. You have so many amazing insights and such a powerful personal story that I'm really excited to share with our listeners today. And the first thing I want to touch on is this topic that you and I touched on before when we first spoke, and it's this idea of resiliency. And I want to ask you what your definition of resiliency is.
For me, I think resiliency is the ability to bounce back from ridiculously difficult challenges. In law enforcement, we have this kind of macho, I'm the toughest guy in the room or the toughest gal in the room, and I can handle myself. I can handle whatever, challenge is thrown at me. And it's easy to, I guess, kind of have that level of confidence at times until something completely unexpected kind of knocks you for a loop. And that's what really tests your ability to withstand those challenges and to come back from them completely or even stronger if things go very well. So for me, that resilience is physical, it's mental, it's just your ability to recover and just to kind of continue as if nothing happened.
I love that you said come back maybe even stronger than you were before. And as you're talking, so I'm a very visual person. So as you're talking, I'm thinking of this, or I'm visualizing this, force kind of just pushing through the adversity and coming out the other side better. And I always kind of relay it to this. Have you ever seen in Japan, they have this artwork where basically they take broken pottery and they put it back together with gold. Have you seen this before?
I have actually, yes.
So for me, when I think of resilience, it's like sometimes we're going to crack and sometimes we're going to completely shatter, and depending on what the situation in our life is. But how do we put ourselves back together in a way that is maybe even stronger and more beautiful than it was before? And so I kind of visualize, sometimes in my hard times, me trying to mend myself with that gold, bonding of okay, yes, I still have evidence of these things that have happened. They're going to leave scars on us sometimes, whether that's actual physical scars or maybe emotional scars. And, maybe these are things that you'll never forget, but how can those things add to our lives in a way that's positive and for us to become better and stronger than we were before? So that's where my brain goes. And I like using that visual.
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous visual. You still maybe show the scars, but they almost become something beautiful, especially in the artistic sense with that Japanese art that you're referring to. But hopefully, our scars, our experiences, the things that we go through ourselves, hopefully just gives us a better understanding when we see other people going through something that's similar. Yeah. And I think that for me was one of the huge takeaways for me is I think honestly, the personal challenges that I've had have hopefully made me a better leader for others. And this podcast is a great example of that because it's something that I'm willing to share and willing to talk about. And hopefully that makes me more approachable to somebody that is going through a challenge. Because if they see that it's something I'm willing to talk about my own stuff, maybe they're going to say, you know what, I can share it with him as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I almost feel like, and this is my own personal, experience, and I don't want to speak for you, but I almost feel like I've learned over time that it's almost an obligation to talk about these things, a welcomed obligation, to be able to create solidarity and for other people to understand that they're not alone. And even though some of the things that we go through are extraordinarily hard, in some ways, a lot of those things I'm grateful for because I do think it's given me a new opportunity to be able to help others or empathize with other people and have a better understanding of other people's experiences that maybe I wouldn't have had, or have maybe a passion for. In my example, I don't think I'd have a passion for wellness and the things that I'm doing if I hadn't had gone through the things that I went through in my life. And there's a certain level of gratitude, even though I wouldn't wish some of the things that I had gone through on anybody else. I'm grateful that I have the opportunity and the platform to be able to help other people. You are a brain tumor survivor.
I am. It's still weird to think about it that way, but yeah, in May of 2024, I actually had an operation to remove a brain tumor from my left ear.
Wow. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience? What was it like finding out? What was it like recovering? And, how did that impact how you lead today in the conversations that you have with your team?
Well, for me, part of it is just paying attention to what your body's trying to tell you. I started noticing that I was having little spells of dizziness, which most of my life, I've been a fairly coordinated individual. I was never great at sports, but I was decent, so I was fairly agile, fairly good balance, all of that. And I also started to have a ringing in my ear, and it was only on the one side. And so, being a little bit stubborn, I kind of put things off. I didn't go to the doctor right away, things like that. But I finally went in and I said, hey, I got this periodic balance issue. I've got this ringing in my ear. What's going on here? So they did an MRI, and they wouldn't tell me what the results were until I went into the doctor's office. So I thought, well, that's probably not great news. So I went in and they said, well, there's no easy way to say it. So we're just going to tell you have a brain tumor. And it's one that's called a vestibular schwannoma. And I said, I've never heard those two words together before. I knew vestibular had something to do with balance. I never knew what a schwannoma was. I'm still not entirely convinced that I do. But they just kind of ripped the Band-Aid off. And for me, that was a pretty traumatic thing. Primarily because when I was 13 years of age, I lost my mother to a brain aneurysm. So hearing that there was anything going wrong inside of my head, to be blunt, scared the crap out of me. Sure. You immediately go flooding back to, your childhood and things that happened and the loss of your mom and all that. So it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. It took me a couple of days to kind of wrap my head around, what this meant. And I started doing research, where can I go to get surgery to give myself the best possible prognosis moving forward. So for a couple of days there, I got really selfish. I was not focusing on work. I was pretty inaccessible to, the folks I work with, mostly because I just got really wrapped up in my own stuff there for a while. So that was unusual. And, that, it kind of like I said earlier, when resilience is coming back from something that is completely unexpected, that really knocks you for a loop. Yeah. And, hearing that news the first time really knocked me for a loop. The next part of it was, okay, I found, one of the best surgeons I could find in the area here is at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And I said, okay, I'm gonna go to this doctor, see, what they say, see if it's something they can operate on, try to find out how bad this is. You hear brain tumor, you immediately go to the worst place.
Yeah.
So after a bunch of months, because this gentleman is, he's world renowned, he's not easy to get into. So I had to wait several months before I could even go in and be seen and get another MRI and things like that. So I will admit that I was not great at handling the stress of that interval between diagnosis and treatment. So, you try to remember, hey, I'm the chief of police. I'm supposed to be this very responsible, very good example to people that I'm working for. I'm supposed to be kind of, this figure that is here to serve everybody else. And you got to kind of refocus your energy to doing that when you are, in fact, spending a lot of time and energy and stress worrying about your own personal stuff. So, that was a very challenging part of my career. Finally, in May, I got to go down and experience the surgery part. I ended up having several different complications as part of that surgery. First of all, they initially thought I had meningitis. as a
Mm.
result of that. So they started just pumping me full of every antibiotic you can imagine. I was originally told it's going to be, oh, you'll just be in the hospital like 4 or 5 days, shouldn't be any big thing. Then they thought I had the meningitis. And then on top of that, I actually developed a side effect known as a central nervous system fluid leak or a CNS leak,
Mm.
where I actually had cerebral spinal fluid coming out of my nose. So there
Wow.
was a leak in between that brain blood barrier there, which is never good. And so I ended up having to undergo a second surgery. So what was supposed to be an initial 4 or 5 days, not a huge deal, still some recovery, still some expectations of having to work on my balance and things like that, turned into a 19-day hospital stay, a second surgery. And in the midst of all that, I also then learned and discovered that the removal of the tumor in my left ear then cost me the hearing in my left ear. So
Mm.
I'm completely 100% deaf. I have no neural auditory pathway on my left side. My auditory nerve just does not connect to my ear anymore. And so that was a lot. That is a lot to go through. That really teaches you a lot about yourself. It teaches you a lot about how you handle adversity, and it really teaches you the value of having an outstanding support system.
Wow.
I'm blessed to have the second love of my life. Jennifer has been on me with this throughout this journey. And honestly, I don't know how I would have handled this without her. So anybody going through any level of difficulty, I just hope and pray that they have the same level of support that I did. I don't know that I would have been strong enough just on my own to do all of that. So it got weird. It took a lot longer than it was supposed to, a lot of extra side effects. And then, there's the humbling experience of you're not allowed to get out of the bed unless a nurse wraps like this big support seatbelt looking thing around your waist and is actually holding you up. And the first time I got up, I actually had two people holding me up because your brain no longer knows how to balance because, of course, your inner ear
Mm.
is a huge part of your vestibular, your balance system. So in addition to losing my hearing, it really, I mean, you just lost one half of your gyro, of your internal stabilizing. And so I had to learn how to walk. It's just not an easy experience. So, you could focus on the negative. You could just kind of crawl up inside yourself and decide, you know what? That's it. My career's over. I'm never going to be able to go back to being a cop, let alone a chief of police. Uh, you know, that's it. That's the end of my story. That's kind of the end of my legacy. Or you can decide that you want to come back like that Japanese China that, hey, I got a lot of cracks. I got a lot of work to do, but this is important enough to me that I want to do what I can to help glue all that back together. And it certainly helps to have somebody at your side that's helping you to do that and to make those decisions and all that. So it was a long process. I had to undergo a ton of physical therapy after I got done at the hospital. I was back to work very part-time, working remote from my home. Um, the city of De Pere was great to me. I mean, they allowed me to do that. Um, they let me get myself back to the point where, okay, I'm walking again, I'm running again. I can do things that I guess a lot of people take for granted. Just being able to drive a car. I wasn't allowed to drive
Mm.
until I got signed off from my vestibular therapist. As a police officer, that's a weird thing. Number one, we're not all real good with authority to begin with. We don't like to be told what to do necessarily. But it's also, driving a car is once you're 16 in this country, it's a large part of everyone's identity. You get that independence. You get that, hey, I can go where I want. I can do what I want. You just drive. And then as a police officer, you add on I'm used to driving a squad car around and driving fast, chasing people, whatever the scenario is. And to suddenly, have to kind of almost reprogress through all of those steps to earn the way back to being able to do those things again, it's challenging. And it was a long process, but it's one that I believe now that I'm through it, I've got the benefit of I'm almost 2 years out now. So I call it my brain anniversary. My brain anniversary will be in May again here in 26. But I look back at where I came in that year and a half, 2 years, and I just feel really blessed. Um, Blessed that I was able to do it, blessed that I have a support system helping me do it. And really, I think that that has made me better chief, a better boss, because now I have a firsthand level understanding and empathy for anybody at my place that's going through any kind of, whether it's mental health, physical health, whatever. I feel like I can better relate and better understand and be a better listening board for anybody that's undergoing that kind of a problem or that kind of a challenge. So, not having had major health concerns prior to that in my life, I wasn't probably the best person to talk to about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But you learn, you sort your way through it, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and figure things out on your own and with your support. And then you hopefully take that experience with you, and it just makes you a better listener, better able to empathize.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I know we talked a little bit offline, but I don't think that you've shared all of those details with me. And so a lot of this was really new. So I really appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing what you went through. One of the things I wanted to kind of touch on, there's a few things I want to touch on, but the first thing that kind of stuck out to me, because I related to this so much when you said that you felt guilt for being like selfish, and being like, well, I wasn't really present and I had to take care of myself. And it almost felt like there was like this guilt of like being selfish. And I think that we can all relate to that. I think that's why a lot of us do sacrifice our own wellness because we don't want, to be sick, or we don't want to not be available, and we want to show up for everybody else and we want to pour everything into everybody else. And when we have to take that step back and take care of ourselves, at least for me, I always felt like a little guilt, like that I wasn't showing up in the way that I wanted to. But in your case, completely necessary, completely understandable that you stepped away. But when you said that, like, oh, I was a little selfish at that time, I think we've all had those moments where it's like we know we need to take care of ourselves, but there's this internal battle with that, because we're not maybe used to taking care of ourselves in that way. We're used to taking care of everybody else. And I want to talk a little bit about something that stuck out to me when you and I talked offline was this question mark of, was it the job that impacted your wellness? Could you have been more proactive in some of the things, instead of maybe pushing it off and ignoring some of those symptoms? And I know that now you maybe have more conversations about this, but can you talk a little bit about that and how you think maybe the job influenced it? And do you feel like now you have a newfound appreciation for the career and you're able to put yourself first and be more proactive because of this experience?
Yeah, I think the job, like I said, we like to have this persona or this. I don't know. We're just tough. We're able to solve every problem. We're able to, handle whatever the situation is. And you kind of think, you might tend to dismiss small symptoms in your body. One thing I don't know if I mentioned this to you previously. I also am lucky. I had to have a heart stent put in.
Mm.
This about a year ago in January, not too long after the brain surgery, and you start to question, why am I having a lot of major health concerns? Is it the job? Is it the long hours? Is it working a lot of night shift hours? Is it the fact that when I worked a good chunk of my career on nights, I would power through with a Mountain Dew or two every shift or an energy drink? You start to question a lot of those things. There's nothing scientific to say, oh yeah, the job caused a brain tumor.
Right.
But you start to think, wow, gee, I do work in an environment where I wear a radio on that side of my head, the speaker mic. Am I getting, radio wave radiation? Am I using the radar gun too often? Is there something about the career that brought me to this?
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately you can play that game and what if the situation to death, and you'll never know. I have no idea if the job did any of this to me, but I do know that certain parts of my approach were not real healthy.
Yeah.
The Mountain Dew habit, I love Mountain Dew, the taste of it to this day. I still every once in a while will treat myself, but having two of those a day isn't good for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ton of sugar, a ton of sodium. my physique, you can't see all of me, but take my word for it. I do not have, a marathon runner's physique. So I was already starting at a disadvantage, and large quantities of soda was probably not helpful. But you start to take better stock of that the older you get, I think. When you're young and running and taking calls for service, back to back to back to back, you don't really stop to think about those things.
Mhm.
And with the benefit of a little bit of seasoning and looking back, you start to realize, I am sometimes my own worst enemy. And so, I guess that's part of what I hope that maybe anyone listening to this podcast will benefit from is, don't necessarily learn the hard way like I did by making some bad decisions along the way, but maybe, take one of our old timers' words for it that, your youth only lasts so long and your body's only so resilient on its own, especially if you keep trying to do bad things to it, like, staying up too late, not getting enough sleep, drinking way too much caffeine, whatever people's vices might be. But it can catch up to you in a hurry.
Yeah.
One of the jokes we have here now, because of myself and one of my colleagues, is the extended warranty on your body expires when you turn 50. There's no more bumper to bumper coverage. You're not just going to bounce back like you did prior to that. When you heard 50, that's a
Yeah,
pretty big line to cross.
that's
Uh,
hilarious.
so we encourage everybody, our younger officers especially, take good care of yourself in your 20s, 30s, and 40s because 50 comes faster than you think.
Yeah, well, and I was working at an academy and I had a kid who was probably like 21, maybe 22, like really young. And he actually walked up and he's like, "Hey, ma'am, excuse me, let me ask a question. Like, how can I he's like, I play golf and my hip hurts already. He's like, how can I, focus on that so that, I can walk by the time I'm 40." And it was like a kind of a dagger to my heart because I was like, man, he thinks 40 is old, but I loved that some of these young people are starting to think in those terms of like, how can I be proactive so that I can get to the end of this thing and I can walk and I can move and I can have quality of life. And I think it's these conversations that are helping to, spread the message of proactive, preventative approaches to wellness. And I think we all have had those experiences where we've taken our health for granted and we've taken our youth for granted. What do they say? Youth is wasted on the young. Like when we were all young, like we all thought that we were, put this in quotes, but bulletproof. We thought we were like superhuman. Nothing could happen. We'd never, have aches and pains or anything. And then you get to be older and you understand what all those old timers were saying was true, And so my hope is that through these conversations, you're right, that we'll have more inspiration and education as to how to proactively prioritize yourself and not wait until there's a major issue to deal with it. How can we get in front of it as much as we can? And I want to talk a little bit about your ability to have mental training through this whole thing, because you said something really interesting, which I think is really important to bring back up. You said, I had two options. I could either, feel bad about it and I could be like, man, my life is over, my career is over, and this is it. Or I could say, I'm going to push through. I'm going to learn how to walk. I'm going to learn how to balance. I'm going to get back on the job and I'm going to, be better and stronger than I was before. How were you able to get into that mental headspace? Was there a moment where you were like, kind of crossroads, or how are you able to train that? Because that's really difficult and it takes a lot of enthusiasm to be like, I'm not going to I'm not going to let this define me. I'm going to push.
Well, first, I had a great example early in my life. I mentioned that my mother had passed away from an aneurysm when I was 13. But when I was much younger, she had actually had to have another brain surgery to try to repair some of the damage. And she went through a very close mirror of what I did. She actually went mostly deaf in 1 year. Her vestibular system got messed up as a result. Completely different medical diagnosis, nothing really similar other than they had to do surgery in roughly the same part of her head as they did in mine. But completely, like I said, two completely different medical things. But I saw her struggle when I was a kid. In fact, there was a long time when I was very young where I was essentially her cane if we would go to a grocery store. I would take her arm or she would take my arm, and I was there to kind of help stabilize her, when we were going to the store running errands, whatever that scenario might have been. And the thing that I always admired about my mom, in addition to her being in a service profession as well, was she never really complained about any of that.
Mm.
She just powered through. She tried to keep a smile on her face. She in many ways she had it way worse than I did. She had constant headaches. She had a lot of difficulty with her condition. But you see that example, and even though what happened to me was 30 some years after that, you remember that and you say, you know what, that is a great example to follow. That I want to handle this like my mom would have.
Wow.
The other thing is, and never ever discount the value of a blunt speaking nurse. When I first found out that I had to go in for a second surgery because I had that nervous system CNS fluid leak, cerebral spinal fluid leak, I started freaking out a little bit. Like you could tell because my monitors and everything that I was hooked up to, all of a sudden my blood pressure was going up, my heart rate was going up. I was getting kind of agitated. I was already, I don't even know, 14 days into the hospital stay, starting to look at, can I take this plastic fork from the cafeteria and figure out a way to escape from this place? You start to not want to be in the hospital. I'm getting myself a little bit worked up, and this nurse comes in and she just looks at me. She's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I just got this bad news, and I'm freaking out, and I'm not handling this very well." She's like, "Yeah, no kidding." She's like, "Are you able to just like crawl in there and fix it yourself?" And I said, "No." She's like, "Well, then calm down and let the professionals handle it."
Nice. Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? It's amazing. Some people have different personalities. That was exactly what I needed in that moment. That it wasn't a full blown crisis or anything like that, but it was just one of those things where I was starting to spiral a little bit, and just having her come in and just be that blunt voice of reason. It was just like kind of like, hey, knucklehead, get your cranial rectal inversion reversed, and start making a little bit more sense here and control what you can control.
Yeah.
So those were two motivating factors. One was very much in the moment, and then the example of my mom and how she approached her life and the limited time that she had, and her attitude and her drive and everything else. That was my long-term model for how to do this.
I'm gonna like try not to get emotional. I don't know why it just like kind of hit me, but um, I think that your mom is an example that you never know how you can impact someone's life. And her showing you resilience helped you later in life. Maybe she didn't recognize in that moment that she was going to have such a long lasting impact and was going to help you to get through one of the hardest times in your life 30 years later, but she was leading by example. And I think we have to remember that we have the ability to lead by example, and we might not know when we're going to help someone through a really hard time, and we might not know when that's going to be. But by displaying those what word am I thinking of? Sorry, I got flustered.
Characteristics.
Yes, by displaying that, it's inspiring other people and it's helping other people, and you never know how big of an impact you're going to have. And so I think that is such a beautiful story that, your mom went through something extremely challenging. She showed you what it meant or what it looked like to be resilient, and that helped you to get through one of the hardest times in your life. And now, as a leader, you're setting the example and you're sharing your stories to inspire other people to be able to get through things in their life and to hopefully be more proactive in their lives as well. And so I want to talk a little bit about how this has impacted you as a leader. I know you said that you're like, I came back and I feel like I'm a better chief, I'm a better supervisor. And how do we break the stigma when it comes to wellness? How do we encourage people to also share their stories and also seek resources and support systems that are going to help them?
Well, I can tell you, I learned the lesson two different ways. When I first left, when I knew I was going to be going down for surgery, I didn't tell anybody what was going on. I talked to my two senior most captains. that were going to be in charge basically when I was gone. And I told them, I said, hey, I'm going in for a craniotomy, a brain surgery. But I didn't even get super specific with them because I didn't want people, I was self-conscious, if that
Mhm.
sounds, I didn't want people feeling sorry for me. I also had no clue going into this if I was going to be able to come back to work. I didn't want to think about the possibility of this is it, for my career. And so I didn't tell anyone in the department. The only people I told were again, the two captains that were going to be in charge while I was gone. And of course, like the human resources folks upstairs. And I thought in my head, you know what, that's the right approach. I don't want anybody to worry about me, I don't want anybody to think about it. Just kind of pretend nothing's wrong, basically. And what I found is, people obviously noticed I was gone. People started kind of wondering what was going on. They were wondering, a couple of people were reaching out, hey, are you okay? Is there anything we can do? Things like that. And I learned pretty quickly that what I thought was a better approach was a chicken approach. And so what I did is when I finally, got out of the hospital, thankfully, I basically wrote a long email because I wasn't coming back to work in person for a little while. And I basically just kind of told the story of what I was facing, what happened, and tried to reassure everybody that I was okay, that I was working my way, through the therapy. I intended to come back. And in the email I just said, thank you for all the support and the thoughts. And sorry I wasn't more, upfront about it. And I actually had a lot of people that came to me when I did come back to work that were very thankful that I shared that. And as soon as I did that, I just felt like this weight come off of me because I didn't feel like I was keeping a secret. You talk about kind of that guilt and those kinds of things. And I realized, you know what, Dummy, this isn't just about you. It's not about your personal feeling of embarrassment or, oh, what are people going to say when, oh, the chief got his brain operated on? Did he get the old police joke that when you get promoted, they send you in for a lobotomy. So you start thinking more like a supervisor. Um, you worry about those sorts of things and you kind of get self-conscious. And finally, I just got over myself
Mm.
and in sharing, what I was experiencing, and then telling everybody, hey, I'm working my way back. And then when I started having conversations when I came back, the more I talked about it, the easier it became. The more people, were willing to talk to me about anything. And I've actually had officers since come and talk to me about their own health concerns, and various different things that they're probably not normally just going to walk into the chief of police's office and talk to you about.
Yeah.
But because they saw how I worked through and finally, was comfortable and open and just talking about it and sharing it, it kind of like ripped the seal off and said, you know what, this is okay to talk about.
Hmm.
And to me, that was huge. I'm glad, if somebody does have a health concern and they don't know who to talk to about it and they want to, try to get some advice or how did you find a doctor or whatever. If I can be that resource for somebody else that's going through a stressful time in their life, man, that's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
Um, you sometimes need to get past your own ego or your own self-image or whatever the right word is there, but you just kind of got to get over yourself because what you're talking about is way more important than any perceived personal embarrassment or whatever.
Yeah. Wow. I truly believe that conversations can save lives. I think that the more we can talk about these things, the more people are going to understand that we're all in this together. And no one gets to the end of this life unscathed. We all go through varying levels of hardships and adversities and things in our lives where we need to lean on people. We need to lean on each other. And like I said before, I never liked to share the things that I've been through in my life that were hard either because I didn't want to be perceived as weak. And I also had, and this is, maybe my own experience, but I also had this fear of being a woman talking about stuff because I didn't want to be like the whiny, cry girl. Do you know what I mean? Like in my mind, like that's how I was. I was like, nope, I got to be even stronger. I got to be even more this or that because I have to prove myself. And I don't want to be viewed as the girl who's crying about stuff. And now, people are rolling their eyes or whatever. And I realized that it was just a story that I was telling myself to try to protect myself in whatever way. And I have now understand that, the strength is through those shared experiences. The strength is through the support systems and getting through these hard things together. And I think the more we can have vulnerability and authenticity in that, the more people are going to your point, reach out and ask for help, especially if they know that you've been through something hard and they trust you. I mean, when we talk about like ROI, what is a bigger ROI than someone coming to you and saying, "Hey, Chief, I trust you and I'm going through this hard thing. Can you help me?" Like that's the return on investment of your time into your people of, sharing those things. To me, there's nothing better.
Yeah, 100%. If I can be any sort of, even just a small little bit of help to anybody that I work with, then I feel like I've done something worthwhile.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing and being vulnerable. And my last little question, or kind of topic of discussion is, what's next? I know that you're looking at some, long-term strategies on how you can, better support your agency through various wellness resources and modalities. So, what is kind of on the horizon for you guys in the wellness space?
Well, the first thing that we did just this last year was we actually got on board with a wellness service provider. We, like most cities have like an employee assistance program, basically a hotline where employees, if they're going through kind of a tough time, they can kind of reach out and take advantage of that as EAP, employee assistance program. But in my experience, that always maybe wasn't appropriate for people that are going through like specific law enforcement type traumas, whether it's a critical incident that they've been through, whether it's post-traumatic stress, whether it's just dealing with the ongoing, vicarious traumas, that we see. You see people suffering, you see bad accidents, you see people that are deceased, all those things that can kind of sneak up on you. And I thought, you know what, we really need somebody that specializes in that. And one of my captains was instrumental. He found a local place here in Wisconsin where they basically cater to veterans, to police officers, to firefighters, to paramedics, people that kind of all go through those similar types of experiences. And thankfully, we got in with them. We signed a contract with them. Ironically, like 4 days before we actually had an officer involved critical incident.
Wow.
Um, thank God, right? It's a relationship that we probably should have had years ago, to be honest. But it kind of took, all of us trying to find something better. In my generation, I've been a cop since '98. You just tough it up. You go on to the next call. There were no debriefs. There was no whatever. You just had to be tough, have a stiff upper lip, and go do your job. It's what are you doing standing around for? Go take another call. So to see that the profession has advanced to the level now where we're smart about these things, we're trying to set things up like these resources, and it doesn't have to be a critical incident. If somebody's just going through a rough patch in their personal life, this is a resource that is available to them at no charge. Nobody talks to me. The only thing that I know about this particular service provider is every once in a while they'll send us a statement, and it just says, "Hey, you've got X dollars remaining in your account for the year." And I say, "Good. That means somebody's using it. Don't call me until we run out of money, and I'll get you some more." That's my role in the program, and that is as it should be. I think people need to feel safe, feel that everything that they're saying is confidential. If you can't be honest with somebody that's trying to provide you with those kinds of services, then you're not going to really get any of the assistance that you actually need.
Right.
So for me, that's the biggest part, is having that faith that the only thing the chief knows about any of this is that he pays a bill once in a while, doesn't know who it's for. Just that, that's all I need to know is, that my people have help available to them, and hopefully they're using it.
Yeah.
So that to me is a great way to set up that professional support network. The other thing that we have established here is a peer officer support team or post. And that's a team of officers that go through some specialized training, and they're not to the level of, people that are fully trained counselors that specialize in vicarious trauma or post-traumatic stress or anything like that, but they are trained in how to support their peer officers with lower level concerns, or if they have a higher level concern, but they reach out to one of these post members, how to hook them up with the resources that can provide that next level of service that they might be needing. And cop culture being what it is, they might feel a lot more comfortable talking to another fellow officer before they're going to ever talk to somebody outside the department. So we also wanted to have somebody in that position where it's somebody that they know personally already, that they feel already somewhat comfortable talking to, so that if they're trying to figure out what does the first step of reaching out look like, they can go to one of those peer support officers. And ultimately, my number one goal as a chief of police, is I want all of our officers to go home to their family safe at the end of every single day. I want them to enjoy a long, safe career. And after that, I want them to collect a whole lot of retirement checks. I want them to collect, thousands of retirement checks. I'm sure that's near and dear to your mission with Firstgevity, because obviously it's not just about longevity, but it's also about, that quality of life. And that's what I want, is I want to make sure that we are doing everything we possibly can to support people that see and experience a lot of hard things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I'm so glad that you brought up the quality of life, because I think that a, a lot of the conversations I had in the past was like, how can we just get to the end? And it was never like, how can we get to the end well? And I think you have to have that. No one, I don't care who you are, no one wants to get to the end of a 20, 30-year career and not have life left in them. No one wants that. Everyone wants to be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor, be there with their family, travel, whatever it is that you want to do, that you deserve to be able to do. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I think that it's a, how can we get everyone to the end of this thing well?
Yeah, I think it's probably the single most important part of my job. I do a lot of budgeting, I do a lot of scheduling, whatever those administrative type tasks are. But ultimately, I view myself as the department dad. It's my job to make sure everybody comes out okay, at the end. And if I do a good job raising them, they will live long, happy, and healthy lives. And that's a perspective that I probably didn't have as much, 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that perspective, because I think that it's a perspective of that these are humans, like these are people who you genuinely care about, and you want them to have the most success in their professional and personal lives as they possibly can. And I think the more we can start to really see, when we talk about these things, it's not a checkbox, it's not a number, it's a human life, it's a person. How can we have meaningful conversations around people? And so you saying that shows me that you're looking at them as people. You are looking at them as almost like your work kids that you want to succeed and be able to fly at the end of everything.
It's kind of a weird analogy, because a lot of them are so much better at so many things than I am. I've never been like a tactical SWAT operator, for example. So it's kind of a weird analogy, because there's a whole lot that they teach me and could teach me. But at the end of the day, I feel like a caretaker figure, I guess, is maybe a better way, is that I want to make sure that I do everything I can to make sure that they're well taken care of. And like I say, I want them all to go home happy, healthy, and have long, successful lives.
Yeah, and
And
I would imagine that they, I was talking to my fiance about this, and I was like, the person who I would want to work for is having those conversations. The person who I would stay at an organization for are the ones that I know care about me. And so of course we could dive into this. We're running short on time, so I want to make sure that, I get you out of here and respect your time. But when we talk about retention and, we talk about taking care of people, it's like, that's it. People, I've never, ever, again, I've never met anyone who's like, I want to work for an organization that doesn't care about me. No one wants that, And so when it comes to retention, having those conversations and having leadership who genuinely care about you as a human being, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. We've in law enforcement, you get new bosses periodically. At my old department, we had a new chief of police, I think like every 3 or 4 years, it seemed like. And you can kind of quickly learn who values people and who's just kind of trying to get through.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to be the boss that I would want to work for.
Yeah.
Um, it's just, we spend a lot of our adult lives working. Law enforcement is a very challenging profession. So let's try to make the workplace as good of an environment as we possibly can, make it as family oriented as we possibly can, so that it's not a miserable experience, so that it feels like, hey, I'm doing a tough job, but it's a very worthwhile job. And I've got a lot of really good people that are all kind of pulling that rope in the same direction, trying to make a positive difference and taking care of each other too.
Yeah.
The old cliche, you can't pour from an empty cup. Well, we all like to fill each other's cups as well. It's almost a naturally occurring thing, that peer officer support team, that desire for everybody to kind of look out for each other too, which I think just really speaks to the culture, of having an agency where everybody feels more family, more just care and concern about each other. You don't always get that. And I feel tremendously blessed to be a part of an organization like that. They certainly were good to me when I was going through my struggles. And at the end of the day, I owe everybody at least that, if not more.
Yeah, I love that. We know that the younger generation are going to be the future leaders of the organization. And so for those younger men and women who are entering into the career today that may find themselves in a leadership position later, or at the very least, have a long and successful career, what words of wisdom would you share with them that you wish you would have known when you were younger, or something that's helped you along the way that you want to pass on to them?
I would say, if I had to sum it up in one sentence, I would say don't underestimate the mental toll of the job.
Mm.
We see a lot of things, we experience a lot of things, we have things that we experience vicariously by seeing other people going through them or suffering through them. As cops, we're typically hyper alert. We always sit with our back to a wall so we can see the door of the restaurant, even on our lunch break, all those kinds of things. And we pride ourselves, I can take this tactical approach and be super safe. But maybe we don't have that same level of appreciation for some of the mental stressors, the mental health things that we're seeing and experience. I wish somebody would have told me that when I was younger. Hey, pay attention to not just your body. We obviously take good care of our body. If you get a headache, you take ibuprofen. If your muscles all hurt because you got in a really bad fight the day before, you take ibuprofen. Maybe you get a massage, find a hot tub, a cold tub. We're pretty good at taking care of the physical side, but we need to work on taking care of our minds as well, our mental health. And, I wish somebody would have really stressed to me proactive mental health care is every bit as important as treating your body right. And I think a lot of people overlook that mental side of things. So, my hope is now that the profession as a whole is smarter, we know more about taking care of that mental health side, but it is still something that part of it is not being afraid to talk about it, getting rid of that stigma, being, like I said, rip that seal off, make sure that people know that some of these things are okay to talk about, and take good care of the mental health side too. It's not just the body side, but the mind is important.
Thank you.
That would be, I don't know how wise that is, but that's stuff I wish somebody maybe would have told me 28 years ago.
Thank you. No, I appreciate your time so much. And I appreciate you coming on here and being vulnerable and sharing your story and your experiences and the things that you're doing organizationally. Honestly, thank you so much.
Well, thank you as well for the opportunity. And if I help even just one person, I feel pretty good about that.
Same. Thank you.